Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Workonomy Chats. It's a web series where we at Office Depot tackle universal pain points that businesses have to deal with, and we usually have an awesome speaker, author, business owner, or expert that brings in some knowledge and advice, and we share it with you guys, the business owner, and then you get to leave with some actionable, knowledgeable nuggets to take home with you to work on your business, to grow it, to expand it, to start it for some people. So I want to, first of all, thank you guys for joining us. You can find all of our information at our Workonomy Facebook group, as well as our YouTube channels. So if you love this episode, we have 12 more, and you can always find that stuff in our Workonomy group and on the YouTube channel for Office Depot. Today, we have a super special co-stream. She's the author of Growth IQ, which I've read, and she saw. I read it 3 times. It's a fantastic book, may I say. I'm gonna bring Tiffani in right now. Hey Tiffani, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? I'm really thrilled to be here today with Workonomy and Office Depot. It's awesome.
Awesome, thank you so much. And again, we're just so happy that you could find the time to join me in this and to help our little community help grow their businesses. So real quick, Tiffani, you're the Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce. It's a mouthful, so I had to practice saying that a few times. As well as a speaker and a sales strategist, you have a lot of years under your belt. Could you give a brief description of how you came to be where you are and how you started writing Growth IQ?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is, my long and illustrious career, I'm only 25, so I'm not sure how I was able to do sort of all those things. I'm kidding. Totally kidding. But I like to call myself a recovering seller. So, I grew up selling technology and really kind of carrying a bag and carrying a quota for a number of years. And then I moved into management and I started getting into marketing and then customer service. So I had this wonderful experience of running sort of the customer facing organizations as it related more specifically in technology companies. Mm-hmm. And then I spent 10 years at Gartner as an advisor and research fellow, sort of academically from an analyst perspective, studying the market and best practices and what high performing companies were doing versus others. And all the way from startup one-man shops, like I'm about to hire my first salesperson, all the way to I'm trying to train an entire 30,000 sellers on how to social sell. So, I've had that spectrum.
Wow.
And then the last couple of years at Salesforce. So I've been here for 3, and it's been fantastic to travel the world and really evangelize sort of the impact of which technology can make for businesses of all sizes in being better and engaging with their customers.
This might be too weird of a question, but what would a day-to-day look like for a growth evangelist or innovation specialist?
Well, it depends, right? It depends if I'm on an airplane, right? So last year in 2018, I flew 340,000 flying miles. I was on 6 continents. I probably gave 100 keynotes somewhere in the world. I was in Johannesburg and Sydney and Hong Kong and Singapore and Mexico and Iceland and the US. I mean, it was a really fantastic year. So a day in the life is a lot of fly miles, a lot of hotels, a lot of customer meetings, but I spend a majority of my time actually consuming content and spending time speaking to customers to listen and learn about what's going on in the market so that I can look for those patterns that I can then share back out via blogs or podcasts or sessions like this, where you get to kind of assimilate all that information and then sort of give it back out. And as you give it back out, you kind of test what you're thinking. And it's a great litmus test. People will tell you very quickly if you're way off base or if you're on base. And then, that's kind of the genesis of what happened with the book. It was just years of having these conversations and then what was sticking and what was resonating and what needed to be said. So that's how Growth IQ happened.
Awesome. And again, I said it was a great book, and reading it 3 times is an indicator of that. But also another thing is, what I really loved about your book, and then we're going to start diving a little deeper into it, is like you use very good real life examples of brands that I see each and every day. Whether they made a good choice or a bad choice, these brands are still there to a certain degree. And what I love about it is I can drive by a business and be like, oh my God, I know exactly what they did 10 years ago to get to that point. And it's a really exciting realization to know that this simple strategy, this idea, this philosophy can be brought out on an enterprise level and make and disrupt an entire economy if it wants to. I mean, I'm not going to throw a bunch of brands right off the bat. We'll probably focus on some, but like Netflix. I mean, that's an obvious one, right? So I really wanted to commend you on writing something that, you know, I don't read too many business books. I read a few, but this was a very easy read for me. And I think that was huge for me. It was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to read this book. No offense. And then realizing, oh, I already read through it and I really enjoyed it and I want to read it again so I could actually lock in some more information. I was very impressed, and I can't wait for you to write another book if you decide to do so.
Well, you know, I got some really great advice early when I started down this path of thinking about writing the book, was write the book you would want to read. And so I'm a visual learner, listen learner, not necessarily a read learner. And so I needed to write a book that wasn't heavy of a read because it's not the way I learn and I consume. So I tried to do little things like underline things in advance of what I thought was important on a page because someone may not read the whole page, or I used sketch notes instead of using heavy sort of PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets. And it was like, here's the takeaways. So if you don't want to read the whole chapter because you're not interested in that particular company or what I had begun to say, you can read the takeaway and move on. So I was very conscious of trying to write that book that I would want to read, number one. And number two, I wanted to write a book like I speak, because I speak a lot. And so if I wrote a very dry academic sounding book, someone would go, she didn't write the book. So I needed it to sound like my storytelling style, if you will. And so I'm glad you enjoyed it.
No, yeah, thank you. I did, very much so. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So obviously, you know, this conversation is about the 10 paths. These 10 paths are in your book, 10 paths to growth. What we spoke about, you know, in preparation for this call is we didn't necessarily want to dive into here's path 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's not how you're supposed to be approaching this. We were talking about context. We're talking about when to know you're supposed to make a jump and where you're supposed to jump. I mean, there's a lot of things you need to do before you even consider taking a path. Am I correct in this?
You are correct. You
Cool.
are correct. That is the place to start.
Awesome. Okay, so let's establish some context. You know, I think we talked about this, and this was 3 questions that every business owner should ask before embarking on any given growth path. And I'm going to read them out right now, and then we'll talk about some of them.
Okay.
So the first one's a really obvious question, but most people don't really sit down and think about it. Do you want to grow? Right? That's a very important question. If you're not even sure of that answer, then you really need to stop before you do anything else. So do you want to grow? And then the next question following that is, what kind of growth? Like, not all growth is good growth. There's a chapter on that. I know there's a couple examples you show in there. And then where do I start? So if you'd mind kind of taking us through those first 3 questions in terms of the mentality of embarking on these growth paths.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the first question of do you want to even grow came from one of those cathartic conversations I had with somebody when I was going down the thought of writing a book, and knowing that the book was going to be about growth. It was like, you know, a friend of mine, Naomi Simpson, she's a shark on Shark Tank Australia, and we were having a bottle of wine in Sydney and talking about the book and talking about growth. And, you know, obviously because she invests in startups and sort of her world, she's like, look, you know, not everyone wants to grow. So like the very first question is, do you even want to grow? And I'm like, how obvious? Like, you know, that's sort of where we need to start, because some people, if you're a small business or a mom and pop shop or a small retail establishment, you know, you might have a lifestyle company where, look, you're just trying to keep a roof over the head and your head and have your kids educated, put them through college. And when that's all done, you just want to have a nice little nest egg and retire into the sunset and be done with being a business owner. That's very different than someone who goes, look, I have 1 store. I want 3 stores in 2 years. I want 5 stores in 5 years. I want 10 stores in 15 years. You know, I have a vision of what I want to do with this brand. That's very different than I'm going to build a company and I want to take it public. Those are 3 very different growth paths. and concepts around it. And that has everything to do with, well, what kind of company do you want to be? A lifestyle company, someone who grows at the pace of market, or do you want to be in hypergrowth mode? And I think going back to what you said originally is, until you can answer those questions, you're going to read the book with a lens of, well, what does that mean to me? And so I think that's a really important exercise, especially for entrepreneurs, small business owners, is asking themselves, in fact, you want to grow? And if so, kind of at what pace do you want to grow? And what does it look like 3 to 5 years from now? And then we can talk about everything else.
Right. Awesome. And then, so let's say you decide, you know what you want. You know how big you want to get. So when we talk about not all growth is good growth, is there anything you could elaborate more on that? I mean, so obviously growing too fast, right, could be an issue. If you can't scale your growth and you have all these people trying to buy your products and you can't pump them out fast enough, to me, that's an obvious example of, not good growth. Is there anything less obvious in terms of bad growth?
Well, I think to your point, that sort of supply and demand, I have nobody who's coming into my store, and I sort of sell, 3 things a day, and I make it on, Oprah's favorite things list. And then all of a sudden it's like, right, you have 10,000 orders and you're like, I don't have enough product.
Right.
So that's sort of what you were just saying. But the flip side of that as well is that happens and you have to hire a bunch of new people. So it's not just sort of the supply chain of, do you have enough product built? Is it just in time? But it's also your people. Can they handle this new volume of demand that you have coming in? Or let's say, you're a restaurant, you used to close at 2 p.m. and now you want to be open for dinner. Well, now you have to hire an entirely different staff, both in the kitchen and the front waiting staff. And so do they represent your brand? Do they know how, you want to serve food? You have to train them. You have to teach them the menu. You have to get them all, skilled up and working in a cohesive way. You're integrating a breakfast crew with a dinner crew, now you have to add a manager, as an example. So people is another side of it. So it's not only the products you sell, it's the people. And then the third thing I'd say is really the systems that you have to manage that business. If it's just 2 or 3 people, you can yell over the partition and say, hey, I need this to get done. And they go, okay, I'll do it. Is different that now you're going to have a warehouse or you have 10 people and you can't see each other and maybe people are working remotely. So do you have the systems in place? And so that's always the things that catch it. It's kind of the people, the process, and the systems that you need to have in order to scale, even if it's just open additional more hours or add one more product or a different location. Those all have impact to those things. So that's when growth isn't good growth, because you do it and then you don't have the people, systems, or processes in place to handle that growth.
Right.
So those are a couple of things you have to watch out for.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. And then so the next question is, where do I start? And I would imagine we start with your book. Am I right on that?
Well,
I'm joking, but not.
Yeah. Yeah, yes. Now when I see people and they ask me what to do, I jokingly say, I was just having this conversation the other day. It's like, I'd love for you to come in and, would you help me out? And I go, here, you have to read the book, and then you'll probably answer a lot of the questions. And then, if there's anything left, I'm happy to answer them for you. But ultimately, yes, it's that. But once you go through the growth sort of questions, the next thing you have to understand is what I call in the book, the context of the market. Like, what is going on in your particular neighborhood, industry, vertical? Are there, implications around things like GDPR in Europe, right? Around sending emails out to people? Is there regulations because you're in a highly regulated industry, like, medical or healthcare or education or government, where it's very regulated? Is it, so also understanding sort of the customers you're trying to sell to and what your goals are. So I call that context. And I know that sounds fairly simplistic, but it's interesting when I'll come back and say, okay, well, who's your target customer? Everybody, Okay, Well, what is your competition doing? I don't know. Well, is your industry that you're selling in even growing? So let's say, for example, you have a small, baking shop on the corner, and you don't have gluten-free items, and you're in a Southern California neighborhood. I'd say you probably should add some gluten-free items.
Right.
So, right? So,
Yeah.
but if you don't know, there's now this big wave of gluten-free and serving that market, and serving that customer base, and you're not doing it. Someone may open, 3 doors down and be a gluten-free and, regular for, a baking shop, and they're going to take business from you. So understanding customer behavior changes, as gluten is one of them, or one of the examples in the book is The Honest Company. It was like people were becoming much more socially conscious and chemically conscious of what they're putting on their children and on babies specifically. And so if you know that is what the trend is in the market, and you're going to launch something in the baby care market, and you're not taking into consideration that people want cruelty-free testing, and they want things that are not bad to the environment and are not using chemicals, and you don't develop that's an example of not using context. So that's definitely, once you've made a decision on growth, the first thing I'd say is understanding the context.
Cool. And so I'm jumping ahead in this book right now because
Okay.
Please let me know if I might be over-interpreting this, but
All righty, go for it.
You use Red Bull as an example, not for context, but I actually, to a certain degree, yes. From the way I read it, they saw the context of a soft drink industry, right? Red Bull is somewhat of a soft drink, but it created new context in a way, right? It created its own niche within the soft drink industry as the energy drink industry.
Correct.
And God, that was such a big aha moment for me when I read that. I was like, oh my gosh, because they've been around for a while, but they realized we can't compete with Coke because, like you said, people say cola. People say Coke in lieu of cola because they kind of dominate that industry. Red Bull saw that, and to me, that's a great example of seeing the context in their market and realizing we need to do something different. We can't do the same thing that they're doing because they're winning at that. They've been winning forever. That might be a stretch, but that's the way I saw it in terms of context. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'd say that I drink Red Bull, and I would say that I'll walk in someplace and I go, "Do you have a Red Bull?" They're like, "Oh, we don't have Red Bull. We have Monster." I'm like, "Oh, that's fine."
Right.
Like, I don't walk in and go, "Do you have an energy drink?"
Right.
Right? I don't say cola. Right? So they've done a great job at doing that. But to your point, it was creating a beachhead of energy drink. It was founded outside of the United States, in Europe, and ultimately they took a long time to make their way to other countries and other regions till they really understood what they were doing. And now, even after they've been in business for as long as they have, you also don't see them diversifying their product portfolio. They only recently have gone into doing flavors. They're not getting into water. They're not getting into soda. They're not getting into, juices. They're staying right in their lane and owning that and diversifying, if you will, based on the context, right? So now all of a sudden they've gotten away from where they began. That's an adrenaline junkie, those kinds of events that now it's in, restaurants and stores and bars. And so they said, well, if the context and our customers shifted, maybe we need flavors now, which they were not willing to do in the beginning. So the context of the market actually shifted, even though they created the market. You could say the same thing about, Amazon bringing books online. All of a sudden things changed. And so now they got into publishing and distribution, all kinds of other things, because the context in the market shifted. So I think you're right. It is a little bit of a stretch, but I do get why you would lean into context on that one.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks. So why is it 10 growth paths instead of, a different number?
Well, so I didn't want it to be like, here's 285 ways to grow. Someone would be like, okay, let me get started right now.
Right.
So there was some method behind the madness where I didn't necessarily want to try to recreate the wheel. I went back and looked at, sort of a lot of the management thinking from all the way back to the 50s and sort of said, look, if all were equal, what is different between the 20th century to the 21st century as it relates to business? And it has everything to do with like what you and I are doing right now. You know, we have the internet, we have collaboration, we can share content in unique ways, we can engage with people. So I wanted to modernize much of the thinking that had been out there and the ways in which companies had grown over the centuries, you know, all the way from Sears, which was, you know, probably the oldest example company I had in the book, to a John Deere, to someone like a Kylie Jenner who's less than 3 or 4 years old. Mm-hmm. And so how do I tell those stories in a way that resonated? So regardless of whether you knew the brand or not, you would understand what I was trying to share. And so it ended up being 10, and I thought my 10th path was going to be something different, and it ended up being something completely different. But ultimately, I don't think there should be anything that someone would look at and go, wow, I've never thought of that, or I've never heard of it. But know that it's a modernization of many of the things that people do today anyway.
Gotcha. Okay, great. And you mentioned Sears, which was my second favorite aha moment in that book. Talking, I don't want to take this from you. I want you to talk about this. The big aha moment was that they were the huge They were the big disruptor with their mail order catalog, and seeing that parallel with e-commerce is insane. I just never saw that coming. But what you just said, you know, talking about what's already been done in the past and it's basically just adapted. I mean, that to me is the best example. Can you kind of elaborate more on Sears?
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, here we are at a point in time where Sears may not be anymore, which is just so disappointing and sad on so many levels. I mean, I grew up buying my Christmas presents out of the Sears catalog. And so, you know, I'm of that generation, and I was born and raised in Hawaii, and we didn't have a lot of retail stores. Like, the Sears catalog was it. So ultimately, it's sad to see what's gone on. But at the end of the day, like, they were the ones that innovated on catalogs that were times of year, holiday catalogs. They were, you know, expanding the types of products that they had in there. I mean, they were the early Amazon in many ways. They did, you know, shipping, they did returns, they did promotions, they did loyalty programs, they were doing credit cards, they got into the internet very early. You know, they were doing a lot of things that we see now. They innovated around sales and marketing, so much so there's almost no company that isn't taking something out of the Sears playbook. They just don't realize it's from the Sears playbook, right? Because it's been around so long. But ultimately, you know, there's an example of a brand that the most valuable thing in my mind that they had was this vast amount of loyal customers that they'd had well over 100 years, and a lot of customer data as well. They owned the kitchen and the appliance market, the repairs and everything. So my argument in the book was, why not own the smart home, right? Why not have been the ones to have bought Nest? Why not have been the ones to buy Ring? Why not been the ones that really brought the connected home to market? Because they had access to all these homes with all their appliances, leading in IoT and things like that. And so it's just a matter of, you know, what got us here can't get us there. And so, you know, for people listening, even if you've had great success growing in the past, it doesn't guarantee that what you've done will help you grow into the future. So you really have to be willing to keep an eye on the context, you know, make sure that you don't realize that things are changing, and try to stay as ahead of it as you can, because I know it's difficult, especially the smaller of an organization you are. But ultimately, that's really the lesson out of that Sears story.
Right. And I wanted to bring that up because, like you said, I mean, they probably knew what they were doing in terms of the catalog. But it's the same thought process in terms of, you know, what Amazon does now, except it's online. You know, it's the exact same thought process. Like, I believe in the book you mentioned, I mean, they have this huge list of customers that they had at their disposal with, you know, I don't know how analytics were back then, but I mean, I'm sure there was some information. And it's just amazing to have that and to not use it. I'm not saying that they didn't use it at all, but yeah, when reading the book, it was kind of like oh my gosh, like that makes so much sense. But you know, hindsight's 20/20, obviously.
That's right.
But at the same time, like you said, it's not entirely a new idea. It was just an adapted idea. It was the same idea, but adapted a little bit to these times with the internet and everything like that. Yeah, one of my most favorite chapters. And something I want to get into now is the idea that most of these chapters and most of these examples don't use one path. Like, right, a lot of these great examples that have seen success use multiple paths, whether it's simultaneously or if it's in succession, but there's a thought process behind it. Obviously using context and market research and all this good stuff that we have at our fingertips. Something that I'm basically fanboying this book right now. Another huge brand that I thought was so innovative and something I didn't think about was Marvel. I mean, probably, I'm not going to say it is the biggest studio or the biggest thing in the movies, but it might be. It might arguably be. I mean, I don't know how much money it rakes in, but it rakes in quite a bit. And Marvel was in trouble not more than, what, 15 years ago? I mean, they were in big trouble. And now look at them. I mean, they completely dominate the movies in terms of the comic book wars. I'm referring to DC Comics. I'm not knocking their movies. I like some of their movies too. But when you think comic book movies, you think Marvel now. And I just thought that was really interesting. And that was a growth path I'd love for you to discuss actually right now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the thing that was interesting in there that you said that we haven't talked about yet is really this combination. And when I made the decision to write the book, once I came up with the paths and I had identified, who I wanted to talk about, the aha moment for me was not, in sort of my sort of discussions in the last 15 years, was not about the one growth path that was picked. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the anchor of the book is the one thing about growth is it's never one thing. And when I saw great success, it really was the combination of multiple growth paths. So it could be customer-based penetration and product, and customer diversification, or sales optimization and customer-based penetration, which are a couple of the paths. And so that combination, context and the sequence, to use what you were just saying, and the order in which things were done, is the secret sauce of Growth IQ. Mm-hmm. It's the context combo sequence. That is the secret sauce. The 10 paths are just sort of the pieces on the chessboard you're moving around to compete against whomever it is you're competing against, right? You use different strategies, just like in sports. If you're playing in the NFL and you're playing a passing team, do not have a defense that's a running defense,
right?
Because you're going to get beat. So understanding what that is and playing that particular game against that particular competitor has everything to do with context, right? Game films are context. And then saying, okay, what combination do we need? We need a passing defense, but they may run a little bit, so we can't just totally do that. And then in the order in which we run plays in a particular game, based on what's the time on the clock, right, versus those other things. And so it's applying things we really understand to business. So in Marvel's case specifically, their greatest asset was their characters. And they, were giving them away for all intent and purposes in licensing deals to other studios where they were making a fraction of what the studios were making off their asset.
Right.
So that play for them was really about partnerships. It was really about taking advantage of a very loyal base they had in the comic books and translating that to movie, and having to get very creative in going out and getting the funds to keep the doors open, because they were very close to, they had filed bankruptcy, but not coming out the other end. And so they leveraged their characters and put 10 characters up on the block to get money. And if they had defaulted on payback, they would have lost those characters forever. And then when they made the decision that, we're going to try to go after a different medium into film, because it had been proven by the studios that the characters could translate from the book to film, they had to pick a character that they had not leveraged and had never been used by another studio. And that was Iron Man. And so going into their, treasure trove of who they could pick, Iron Man had never been seen on a big screen, was not leveraged, had not been used by another studio, and they went out with that first. And of course, the rest is sort of history. So, it's a matter of making sure that when you're looking at where am I going to find growth next, not necessarily always looking externally, but what do you have internally that makes you really unique? And in the Marvel case, it was those assets and those characters that they have. I mean, it's, depending on where you are in the world now, if you're at Universal Hollywood or you're at Disney Florida, you'll see certain characters versus not others because of the complexity of licensing, like who owns Superman or Spider-Man, who owns it's very diluted because they had given up licensing to a lot of their big characters. So depending on where you are in the world, at some Disney theme park, you may see some characters and not others, and that's why, because it has everything to do with licensing.
That's so interesting. I didn't know that. I just thought, this person's more popular, so that's why they're there. Because I am a nerd. I love comics. I love video games. I love all that good stuff. And another cool thing I liked with that was basically they just changed mediums. I think that's literally the words you say. They changed the medium of where their characters live. Their Marvel universe is now a cinematic universe rather than a comic book universe. And something that I think is counterintuitive is that. I think that, if I was Stan Lee or, whoever it was, kind of making the decisions, I'd be like, these are comic books. Our fans are comic book fans. They're not movie fans. So that kind of thinking would have actually deterred this huge pivot for this company. And I just wanted to, highlight the fact that you can't be just attached to that one thing that has worked in the past. Like, actually, I feel like that's the common motif that we're going to be going through today. But the idea of, yes, we're attached to these our fans who are comic book fans, but they diversified quite a bit. And now, I mean, they're really reaping the rewards. I mean, Disney bought them for, was it
a lot?
Yeah, I don't even want to say how much. It's just a lot. So I just wanted to highlight that idea of, just because something was working doesn't mean that you should keep doing it. You can adapt, like you said with Sears, is the same idea, just a different context. I don't want to use the word context, but different situation.
Yeah, but it is what you're saying, because really you got to think about it, right? As a comic book reader, I used to read comics because that was the only medium I had choice of.
Right.
Then all of a sudden we had the power of a smartphone on our hand, and then there was YouTube, and then there was streaming, and then there was Twitter, and then there was Facebook, and then there was Instagram. And so do you say I'm just still going to be a comic book?
Right.
Or do you say I have to somehow play in these new mediums that my reader is going to go for entertainment beyond the comic book, and how do I do that? And even some of the creative things they did about introducing characters that, that they own into stories that people are familiar with those characters, to see if people like them.
Yes.
And if people like them, they get their own movie, they get their own comic book, they get their own growth. And so they can test it, with other characters that are beloved. And then you see, movies now where there's 4 or 5 characters, Iron Man and a slew of others, that are fighting in some storyline, and that's how they can test if one of those characters can actually generate enough interest that it will pop out and be the next Iron Man for them.
Right.
So they've been really smart in doing that and playing across the mediums. And in Lego, while it wasn't called out in the book, Lego's another one where really trying to get into the digital side of playing with the toys, and what that looks like, and how to collaborate with, how do you make a hard good feel more connected in this world, and do things that are, more engaging for a community. And that's how you have to think. You just have to start to think that, the consumer, the customer is very different than the customer was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, most definitely 20, 50, 100 years ago. So you can't keep approaching things the same way.
Right, exactly. But here's my favorite part about Marvel was they did that in the comic books, just like they're doing it in the movies, where they'd introduce a character in a comic book. It's the same it's the same idea. It's really cool. So I remember seeing it. I don't remember which one, but because there's so many now. But like whispering to my girlfriend, like, "Oh my God, that's so and so!" Like, and she's like, "Who's that?" I'm like, "Oh, you'll see." And like, there's a movie after it, like Black Panther, I think was probably the one I was talking about. But like, now there's a movie and a franchise behind that, and because they essentially tested it, and knew that it was going to work. So again, one of my favorite. I think we just talked about my 3 favorite brands.
Well,
In your book.
it captured me. Like, I wasn't a comic book reader.
Oh.
So, so part of that story is also customer base penetration, so going into the comic book reader who you've always had and introducing them to the medium of movies.
Right.
That's sort of, offering something to the existing customer base that you have. But it's also attracting an entirely new customer who I never read comic books before. So now I'm watching the movies, and I may or may not, I haven't, but I may or may not ever read a comic book. But now they've captured me in the movie. So now they've taken, 1 + 1 = 3, right? Because you've now not only taken with you a portion of the comic book readers into the movie medium, but you've attracted an entirely new audience who never read the comic books and are now being exposed to all of these characters and stories. And so that's the power of those two things together.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. All right. So we did kind of promote this a little bit beforehand. So we did get a handful of questions. I'm going to read some off, and hopefully we can get some answers to our audience, who hopefully are eagerly awaiting some knowledge. I'm calling them knowledge nuggets today. I don't know why I like that word, but hopefully there's some actionable advice would be great. What's the biggest obstacle when dealing with growth stall?
Yeah, and so in the book, growth stall is when you find yourself as a company having 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters in a row where growth is starting to decline. So you used to do X amount of dollars, a month or a quarter, and now you're doing X -5, X -10, X -15%, right? And you're seeing this sort of slow decline. And then you may just end up where it's just a stall. And everyone's had one. McDonald's has had one. Everybody has had a stall. Sort of the stat is 80% of businesses at some point will hit a stall, and then the stat is, and a small percentage will find their way out of a stall. So it's a great question, because just because you get in one doesn't mean you're going to be able to get out of one. So the biggest obstacle I can tell you is that thinking that if you've gotten out of it once before, that what you did the last time will get you out of it again, is sometimes the biggest obstacle.
Okay.
Another one is you don't actually recognize the stall is coming. So not paying attention to the fact that quarter 1, you have a little blip. There's no reason to hit the panic button. But you see 2 quarters in a row where it's starting to stall. That's where you need to sort of start to pay attention before you get into a full-blown one and you're 4 or 5 quarters of no growth. Now you have no money to make investment in trying to course correct. Your only course of action is letting go of people and potentially cutting headcount and reducing your size of your Salesforce or your marketing budget. And then what ends up happening? You're naturally just in this vicious cycle of not growing. So those are really the two, sort of thinking about it the same way you always have, or not recognizing it fast enough. And unfortunately, the biggest obstacle is actually the human side of growth stalls. It's not really a problem. We'll be fine. I've gotten out of them before. That's sort of what got me here will get me there attitude. I know that sounds overly simplistic, but if those two things get fixed, you may never end up in a growth stall, which that's the goal. Like, you might have a quarter slowdown, but you don't go into quarter, right? You want to correct fast enough that you don't get into a point where you have to start really making hard cut decisions.
And is this something that you would recommend, because a lot of this is more for small business owners. A lot of small business owners don't have the luxury of having, C-suite executives to bounce ideas off of. Is this something that a CEO should be doing on their own, or should they be actually seeking out people to, I don't know if they should be, you can hire people, but I know a lot of small business owners can't necessarily do that. So is there a way for them to receive support or ideas in terms of, I think I'm going to growth stall, or I don't want to hit a growth stall. So who do I talk to about that? I guess that's the question is, how does a small business owner deal with that?
But I think this is where like associations, right? The Small Business Administration, or if you've got, a fast growing company, you might be part of the YPO, right? Or it might be, just a community or an industry, or going to events and listening to podcasts or reading books or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, as a small business owner, the problem is that most are so heads down running the business that they never take a moment in time every day to sort of just look at the business, talk to customers, walk the floor, talk to the employees, and get a pulse for, because once again, if you're too far removed from what's happening, you get caught off guard with a stall. But if you start to see it happening because you're paying attention, that's the moment to go out and say, hey, have less people been coming in the store, or is the phone ringing less? Like, what's happening? Like, being able to be in touch with that, then I may not know how to fix this, but being willing to then say, do I have a network? Do I have a way that I can go and socialize ideas? And this is where sort of communities really pay dividends, especially for small businesses, joining some association or group that you can go and bounce these ideas off of. Hiring somebody, a consultant, the challenge always with that is that you want to be able to sort of learn what it is you need to do on your own. The consultant is great to maybe give you context that you don't know, and then ideas potentially of what others have done when to drive store traffic or increase leads or whatever it might be. And so I think it's always important for small business owners to have the courage to actually go externally and ask for help before it becomes too late.
Yeah, so that's human. That's a human error. If you don't have the courage, if you don't want to ask for help, it all boils down to the person, right? That's what I find in most business pain points, is that it tends to go down to someone thinks they know best and they kind of don't really branch out or find other points of interest to see if what they're thinking is actually valid.
Right.
Because business owners are passionate, and they're supposed to, you have to be. So if you got to kind of believe in what you think, but at the same time, you also have to be able to adapt and modify what your vision is, because you're not everybody. You're one person. So
yeah, and I'd say that a lot of the time when I talk to small business owners, is they don't have the time to do these kinds of things,
right.
Because they are, they're head of sales, they're the head of marketing, they're the head of finance, they're the strategy team, they're sort of the one-man band. But really sort of that is the critical factor here. You have to find a way to carve time out of your day to think about the business, not just be in the business. And so thinking about the business, talking to customers and employees, people on the floor if they're manufacturing, the people that are making everything happen. Remember, it's sort of systems, process, people. You have to take that time, because if you're just heads down, grinding, trying to keep it afloat, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. So you really have to take the time.
Do you have any personal tips or advice in terms of, basically like carving out that time every day? I mean, do you have any practices that help you do that?
I do, but I, of course, don't have that kind of job, right?
Right.
If I was running my own business and I was an entrepreneur, it's different, right? Because my job is to do exactly what I'm doing, which is to keep a pulse on what's happening in the industry, where I'm not running a business in that way.
Right.
But there's many people from Jeff Bezos on down that will say, I don't start meetings before this time in the morning, or every day at 2 to 3 o'clock. I don't, I sit and I sort of think about what I'm. Literally, if it requires you to block time out on your calendar every day, then that's what you need to do. And you have to stand firm to it. Don't let it shift, or it's no meetings on Wednesday so everyone can actually get some work done, or,
right.
Move your staff meetings to different days to give people flexibility, or no meetings after 3. It's thinking time. Like, you just have to get creative. But, as a leader, even an individual business owner, if you have people on your staff, you need to give them permission to take the time as well to think, because they will bubble up ideas to you. And also it gives them the freedom to figure out what's the solution to the problems you're facing. So you may find the answers internally, and you don't have to go externally. But that means you have to give your people time to think.
I love that. That's amazing advice. So I'm going to ask you another question. We're running out of time, so I don't want to take all your time. I really appreciate everything you've said so far. I don't know if you noticed, but I've been taking notes down here too.
Oh, good.
Okay, here's a question I have. I'm gonna read the whole thing I wrote out. So I love how you introduce the topic and solidify these ideas with multiple concrete examples. In your research, what's a common theme with all of these paths? In terms of what's a common theme in all your paths?
So I'd say the one common theme for me was the first path, which was customer experience. That I chose that specifically as being first for a couple of reasons. One, any decisions that you make about launching a new product or expanding into new markets or hiring new people should always have the customer at the center of those decisions. But the twin of that comment is also your employees have to be prepared, enabled, empowered, whatever word you want to use, to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So those two things in unison, that was the common theme. But in each of the case studies, what I tried to do was show a snippet in time versus giving the whole Seer story in 100 years. There's no way I could do that in 5 pages. Right. I would do it no justice. So in the 30 case studies, I picked a moment in time that told the story of that particular path. So each path has 3 case studies. 2 are positive uses, effective uses of that particular growth path to stimulate growth in combination with other paths. And the third one is a cautionary tale where someone did not do it very well and has seen the negative effects of that. So that's why there's 30 case studies, and it was the best way for me to tell that story was to let the story tell the story versus me pontificating about what I thought was reality. Mm-hmm. But the common theme would be 2. 1, the importance of the customer in all the decisions that get made for you. And the second, the employee.
Okay, gotcha. That's awesome, and I appreciate that. So a random question. This is a question I've been asking recently to our speakers because everyone's so knowledgeable, it's almost overwhelming how you get this information. I know you've gotten a lot of it through experience, but I'm curious, are there any books or podcasts that you would suggest to someone who wants to continue, of course, after they read Growth IQ, but I read this and then I started religiously listening to a specific podcast because it opened my mind to this idea. Are there any podcasts or books that you could recommend?
Oh, there's so many. So there's just so many. I love. I would say this. I would say, depending on what your role is, the books and the content will naturally find you. Ooh. So if you're a leader, it's a leadership book. It might be How to Run Effective Teams. That might be someone like a Whitney Johnson. If it's, you have to be really connected to your employees and thinking about sort of this exceptional experience that you're delivering, over and over again, that sort of search of excellence. I'd be like, it's all Tom Peters all day long. If it's, I really want to rethink how I'm marketing and what I'm doing there, it's Seth Godin and in all his works. If it's, I need to figure out.
Really? All right, we'll just continue on with Seth Godin right after.
Or if you're thinking about completely rethinking how you innovate, something like a Blue Ocean Strategy or even Josh Linkner on hacking innovation. There's so much great stuff out there. Simon Sinek's work. There's a lot. But I would say that, ultimately for me, it depends where you think your strengths are. And then that's where you want to pivot in to learn as much as you can about it. I'm not so much a believer in I'm not very good at something, so I want to go get really good at it because it wastes a lot of cycle times. You can hire people to be much better at things you're not very good at. And so I would say more than anything, though, you have to be committed to being a student of your profession, whatever that is, and be willing to, ask for help and look for help. And I think now today, whether it's a TED Talk or a book or a podcast or an event, an industry event, you have to constantly try to keep up and don't overwhelm yourself. And because sometimes it can be intimidating and overwhelming, and then all of a sudden you do nothing. It's sort of analysis paralysis. But you have to try to, stay in touch with the business. And I would say the best source of where you should be paying attention is your customers and your employees.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. So that about wraps it up. I've eaten an hour of your day. I apologize, but thank you so much for taking the time.
All
It
right.
was a fun conversation. I want to remind everybody, you could get all this information in Growth IQ. You mentioned Seth Godin. He said he has an amazing quote on here. I'm going to read it. I'm going to read part of it. No glib answers here, simply hard-won wisdom that will provoke big changes for organizations large and small. While you use major enterprise examples, these are also applicable for small business owners. And that's why I really like this, is that you could take these giant companies and kind of slim them down and still have the same philosophies, the same strategies. Tiffani, thank you so much. Where can we find your book?
You can find it at Barnes & Noble, almost all the retail stores, Brick-and-Mortar, as well as online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all 800 CEO Read and independent books. It's in the U.S. and at Office Depot.
That's right.
At about a dozen Office Depots, which, I really appreciate. And then internationally, it'll be hitting the UK and Commonwealth here in a couple of weeks. And then it's making its way through the Spanish-speaking market and Portuguese and Simple Chinese, Mandarin, Vietnam. It's sort of going to start to make its global trek coming in the middle and end of 19 and beginning of 20. So she's on her own mission now to go travel the world.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And are you going to be kind of touring with her?
I don't know if I can do any more than I do, but yeah,
right.
I'm pretty out there as much as I can be. And then I have the podcast, What's Next, on iTunes with Tiffani Bova. And I'm pretty active on social. So not hard to find if you're looking for more content.
Real quick, it's at Tiffani Bova. Is that your Twitter handle?
It's at Tiffani_Bova.
Bova. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tiffani. I really appreciate your time. We hope we can come back and we'll continue having these great conversations.
Well, good. And if I'm ever busy for an interview about the book, I'm going to have you do it for me. That was great.
Oh yeah, I got
three
notes.
times reading. You know it.
I got tons and even more notes now. So I would be honored.
All right.
All right. Have a great day.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much.
Have
a great day.
Bye-bye.
All right. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, that was Tiffani Bova. She just spent an hour discussing her book, Growth IQ, which you can find at select Office Depots. 10 paths to growth, 10 different growth strategies. And I am not exaggerating saying that this is probably my favorite book that I read in 2018. And then I read it again a few times in 2019. But amazing examples, and will really seriously open your mind in terms of how you can grow your business, because it's not just strategy and paths, it's also the mindset of how to embark on these paths or to know which paths to take. Tiffani has said she will definitely continue to help answer questions. So as you guys watch this, because it's on Facebook, you're going to be able to watch this as many times as you want. As questions arise, please feel free to post your questions in the comment section, because Tiffani and I will help and we'll collaborate and make sure we get answers to you. You can also ask all these questions and get them all answered at our Facebook Workonomy group, as well as our LinkedIn Workonomy group. Our videos are archived on the YouTube channel, and you can always check out OfficeDepot.com. Check out what Workonomy is. This is our Workonomy chats where we help business owners figure out their next move or their next step in terms of growing or starting their business. But Workonomy offers a huge suite of business services that will also help you get started. You won't have to hire an entire staff like an IT department. You can actually get that stuff done with Workonomy. So check that out at OfficeDepot.com. Check us out at Facebook. Have a great day, guys. And I'll catch you.